that we don't believe that a VAT increase is the right way to proceed, especially if it is not accompanied with bold economic reforms. They're going to focus on going for growth. If we don't get growth, then we're going to be sitting back in October as a government, back in February next year, scrabbling around looking for scraps of money to be able to do what we need to do. We have a medium-term development plan that says that we must lower the cost of living, that says we must absolutely go for economic growth, and that we must make sure that we make government more efficient. There are a number of huge, bold announcements that could have been made today that will send the right message out. Instead, we're back in borrow, cut, tax and spend. And
without the DA, can the ANC-led coalition be able to pass this budget?
Well, it's odd to me that a budget would be tabled without confidence that you have a majority. The ANC have a 39% in Parliament. They need other people to pass it. If there are other parties that want to support a 1% increase in VAT over the 2 years cumulatively, then obviously they must enter into the negotiations. We are willing to keep the door open to discuss before the instruments come to the floor of Parliament. The fiscal framework, the Money Laws Amendment Bill, and of course the Division of Revenue Act. There is still some time for us to be able to have another chat and another look about what we can do to negotiate further on these, and we remain open to doing so. But this has to be a budget that actually takes account the views and opinions of all of its people, and there are some things that we want. We've said very clearly, we're in this government for growth and jobs. If we are not going to take the bold decisions that go hard for growth and jobs, well then we're going to not lend our support and vote to budgets that don't speak to that. And I hope that sanity is going to prevail. I hope that now we can enter into a more mature period of discussing this, because as this budget currently sits today, it has 39 to 40% of the support. Needs 50% plus one to get over.
Lastly, the minister announcing that the recommendations for the spending reviews will be tabled before cabinet in the next month. What are you hoping that will come out of those?
Well, we would have liked to. We had made a number of recommendations around spending reviews. It's something that we support, but I think I would have much rather had some very concrete time frames, decisions that before with a simple speech was made. And that was one of the things that we've asked quite clearly for, was to be able to have sight of those things, along with some other things that we believe are very important. Things that have been spoken about in every budget, but not done. And that for me is the frustration. We needed a budget today that was going to make a big bunker-busting, bold dash for growth. And this budget, as I've said, is going to harm poorer South Africans and the middle class by increasing VAT. Personal income tax is also going up because there's no provision for bracket creep. And those things perhaps could have been negotiated, but not in an environment where you're not in the same budget putting the big, bold decisions on the table.
All right, thank you so much, John Steenhuisen, the leader of the Democratic Alliance.
And welcome back from our live broadcast outside the Dome here in Parliament, where we've just heard from Minister Kodogwana, who delivered the budget for 2025. We are now joined by Dr. Mark Burke, who's going to share some of his views on what we've just heard inside. Dr. Mark, welcome. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. I'm proud to be part of a team that's yet again said we cannot support tax increases, be that VAT, personal income tax or corporate tax. So our leader has come out and said the DA is not in a position to support this budget.
Now, Mark, from listening to the speech, John has already mentioned about economic growth and jobs. Can you tell us more about that and what's going on with this particular budget in regards to that?
It's at the heart of the problem that we're now facing. The ANC, with their 39% of the seats in Parliament, is insisting on a budget that doesn't speak to creating jobs and creating the environment where the economy can grow in the short term by investing in infrastructure, and in the long term by creating an environment conducive for growth. Moreover, this is a minority budget. It does not have the support of Parliament. It does not have the support of the DA within the GNU, and more broadly, Parliament is saying they cannot support this budget.
Well, we've heard from Dr. Mark Burke. We're now going to go back to the federal leader, John Steenhuisen, who is live with ENCA.
At the end of the 2-year period, without actually telling people how you're going to get to the growth that needs to be done. Concessioning of the ports, being able to make sure that you have the infrastructure rehabilitation, being able to make sure that you're cutting and getting rid of legislation that is currently a huge inhibitor to investment. Things like the Expropriation Act that are putting investors off. People are looking at South Africa from the United States and now from Europe and saying, but how do I invest in a country where I could have my property taken away from me with nil compensation? We need clarity on those sorts of pieces of legislation that are holding us back. And without that, we cannot in good conscience pass a VAT increase onto the people of South Africa without actually being able to be satisfied that we're getting the growth. Look, there's still time to talk and negotiate. The fiscal framework is being tabled on the 2nd of April. That's the first time something's going to be voted on in the House. Then the Budget Laws Amendment Bill, and then DORA at the end of it. All of those require a parliamentary majority. As we sit here today, this budget has around 39 to 40% of the House. It doesn't have a majority to pass.
What were the concessions that you wanted the President to make, which he didn't agree upon, given now that you are backing away from the budget, which the ANC suggests you initially agreed on?
No, we never initially agreed on anything. We have been very clear and consistent from the beginning that we're opposed to VAT. We were prepared to look at these things and negotiate around them if the other concessions would be put on the table.
Which are?
Things like the concessioning of the ports of the city of Cape Town. We want time frames, timelines. Things like the Expropriation Act. There needs to be clarity on the Expropriation Act. Currently, it is holding investment back because people are scared to invest in a country where they could lose everything without being able to have any recourse to courts, etc. We wanted just a clarification that matter is in, when there's a nil compensation, that is then confirmed by a court of law. That then protects everyone and it gives expression to Section 25 of the Constitution.
I must turn to the Finance Minister, which is with my colleague.
Welcome back, South Africa. We are still with Dr. Mark Burke. Now, Mark, I just wanted to understand, what is the DA's process now after this budget has been tabled? What's next?
Well, for the first time in South Africa's history, Parliament will now have to go through the steps envisaged in the Constitution, which is passing the bills associated with the budget, and the DA is opposed to this budget, which means practically over the next few months you'll see the DA standing up in Parliament and saying no more taxes.
And from a parliamentary perspective, what are we looking at as the DA to act and stand against this particular budget that's been passed right now?
The first step is 16 days, working days from today, which is the fiscal framework, which will have to find agreement in the committees, and that report will have to be adopted in Parliament. And thereafter, we have 2 more bills, which has got to do with revenue and expenditure. And so those bills will also have to come to Parliament within the next 2 months.
Well, we are back going live to the leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen. We'll be back.
In the House, we are not going to, it doesn't have a majority, and we will continue to obviously negotiate. There's no vote in the House yet. That'll come on the 2nd of April, and obviously as we pass the Taxation Laws Amendment Bill and as we deal with the DORA, and so our door remains open to be able to discuss, but we will not accept the current budget in its current form, and nor will we vote for it in the House.
Yes, and then just last question. So you did say that the majority of the GNU was not in support of this budget speech. Do you believe that the ANC, as the leader of the GNU, are bullying their way
I didn't say that the majority weren't in support. I said this budget doesn't have a majority in Parliament to pass. You need 50% plus 1 to pass this budget, and of course to pass all the instruments for it. That does not exist at the moment in this House. That is why we have a coalition. And we have made some demands for concessions that would have secured our support for this budget. Those were not met. They were not unreasonable. One of them was clarity around the Expropriation Act, which we see as a huge hurdle towards investment here. Who is going to come in their right mind and invest in South Africa in a big capital intensive way if that can be taken away with nil compensation? not by a court of law, but by government officials. We wanted just some clarity on that particular thing and a process to give clarity so we have an expropriation act that is in line with the Constitution, and that was clearly, obviously, a bridge too far for the ANC, and that is why we have not been able to reach a compromise on the budget. However, our door remains open. I'm happy to keep the conversation going, but there has to be realization that this is a coalition. It's not my way or the highway. It requires compromise on all sides, and we've compromised a great deal on minimum wage, on a number of other things. It's time now for the ANC as well to realize that it too, from time to time, needs to make compromises.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome back, South Africa. We are now joined by the Deputy Chief Whip of the Democratic Alliance in Parliament, Baxolile Notata. Welcome. How do you feel about this particular budget that we've just heard from Minister Kondokwane?
Look, I think, first of all, it's a big problem for us. We've been negotiating for the past couple of weeks with the ANC to say no tax, but focus on job creation, economic growth and jobs, because that's what South Africans need to get out of poverty. Now we come here today, they want to present to us a 0.5 increase in VAT in the first year and a 0.5 increase in VAT in the second year, essentially saying that South Africans must foot a 1% VAT increase, whereas there's already a rising cost of living, a high cost of living of South Africans. Millions of them don't have jobs, they can't put food on the table, and ultimately you can't be taxing South Africans to death. It's absolutely ridiculous, and we're not going to support that as the DA, because we need to protect the most vulnerable, the most poor in South Africa by making sure that we create economic growth and jobs. That's what we need. Port concessions that we spoke about to transport our goods to the ports quicker, to be able to create jobs. Attracting investment through infrastructure, those are the things that we've put on the table to them. There are solutions, they are there. All they need to do is listen. But the 39% party of the ANC think that they can come and bulldoze a 1% increase on South Africans. That's absolutely not going to happen in our watch. We're open to negotiations of the DA to make sure that the budget is aligned to economic growth and jobs and not taxing South Africans to death. Jobs is the only way out of poverty, and it cannot be that the middle class is going to be strangled in their neck. They're already drowning in debt. They already cannot afford the cost of living that they have already. Leave the poor South Africans. It's the middle class that pay taxes in South Africa. If you're saying to them there's a 1% increase in VAT, it means you're drowning them further and further into debt, and ultimately you're pushing them towards the poverty lines as well. So we're definitely against that particular issue, but we're open to negotiations. Like I said, we've got proposals that we can put on the table for economic growth and jobs.
And you are setting up a clear binary right now, Bax. Just to expand on that, what is the binary that we are seeing from this budget?
Look, there's a clear binary here in the sense that we must not focus on spending, taxing South Africans more and more. We must focus on economic growth and jobs. That's where the binary is. And that's the only way to lift people out of poverty. This thing of the ANC's corruption over the years has put us where we are today, because they've been corrupt to the core. Terrible, not inefficient spending in terms of in government, paying ridiculous things from people. Cadres are eating while the people of South Africans are starving. And now you're coming back to them, the very same people that you stole from, to say, look, we're going to increase 1% of VAT, which they cannot afford already. And the people that are going to be affected the most, as the poorest of the poor in South Africa, the middle class that pay tax, that cannot afford. They are here, the boot is on their neck. So we cannot afford that. And it's important for the ANC to understand that, and our GNU partners to take the proposals that we've put on the table that come with economic growth and jobs. And that is a clear binary. No taxes, jobs. That's what we need.
Now, Bax, what are the next steps from a parliamentary perspective after hearing the speech? What is next, and what is the day going to be doing going forward?
Look, this has been tabled in Parliament now. It's going to take its course. The Constitution basically stipulates that once the budget is being tabled, then Parliament has to go and scrutinize, debate it in the various portfolios in Parliament that deal with finances, and the portfolios that deal with the departments that need to get a budget from the state. So ultimately, that course will take place. We will negotiate and debate robustly for economic growth and jobs. That's what we need. That's a budget that we need to come out of in the parliamentary process, and we will engage our GNU partners and various other political parties to support that cause, to say let's not increase taxes for South Africans. Let us not increase VAT for South Africans. Let's focus on policies and a budget that is going to be focused on economic growth and jobs. That is the most important thing, so that we can lift more and more South Africans out of poverty into job opportunities. More and more South Africans out of the dead drums of not being able to put food on the table, for them to be able to put food on the table. Where transport is not expensive, where food is not expensive, but ultimately people have jobs and to have dignity. So that is basically what we're going to be doing in Parliament.
South Africa, and I think by burdening our citizens with a cumulative 1%, 0.5% this year, 0.5% next year, in the absence of actually putting on the table some of the big, bold things that need to be done to be able to clear the decks, getting rid of some of the legislative things that are holding investment back in South Africa, some of the big things like concessioning the Cape Town port and the other things, I think that it's wrong. And we went into this budget putting a very clear position on the table that we were opposed to VAT. We went into the election saying we were opposed to VAT. However, we were willing to look at some compromises, but the compromises were clearly not able to be made from the other side, and therefore we are not in a position to support this budget. As we sit today, this budget it's a 39% budget, and it's very, very clear that it's a long way from getting over the line. But we remain open. The first vote on a budget will take place on the 2nd of April when the fiscal framework is tabled. Thereafter, the Taxation Laws Amendment Bill, and thereafter that, the DORA. We are open, we're willing to talk, we're willing to have a discussion, but it has to be a discussion based where the DA actually gets something of what it wants out of the process as well.
Well, some would say, sometimes you can compromise and you can negotiate a settlement. This seems like a red line, an absolute red line, an unreachable goal. It's either or. So how are you going to build consensus in that environment where there doesn't seem to be any wiggle room?
Well, I don't think that there's no wiggle room. I just think that there needs to be a realization by all parties in the coalition that none of them have a majority, and that you do have to make compromises sometimes, as we have on the cabinet seats, as we have on committee chairs, as we have on Bella, as we have on minimum wage. It's also then time for other parties in the coalition to accept that they occasionally need to make a concession so that we walk away with something that's important to our voters and to the people that elected us. And who look to us and say, but why are you in this coalition if you keep having to make the compromises and you get nothing out of it? That's not our coalition's work. It's not our budget's work, and we saw that in Germany. We're seeing the same thing play out in Japan. There is budget politics that happens, and that this is the new era that we're in South Africa. As I've said, I think that if we can get a deal on the table, we can come back on the 2nd of April, we can pass the fiscal framework with a majority, a clear majority.
What does a deal look like?
Well, a deal looks like perhaps a mix of what we've seen today, but also including some of the bigger concessions that we wanted. A relook, for instance, at the Expropriation Act, which is a huge impediment to investment in South Africa. You cannot say it's divorced from the budget. If we're serious about growth in South Africa, which is essential, because otherwise we don't have growth, we're going to be back here in October for adjustment budget, back in February next year, scrabbling around. Currently have growth of 0.6%. It is middling, it's unsustainable for us going forward. We need to go for growth in a big way, and we need to do those things. One of those things is clearing the decks so investors feel that they can come here with confidence. We already have a huge issue in the United States with the Expropriation Act. It's about to hit Europe. We need to be able to say, guys, this is how we clarify the position. And that could easily be done very quickly with an amendment.
And just to stay on that point, because it has been a very sentiment-related thing, and we know that investment is largely guided by sentiment. We've spoken ad nauseum about the tenets of the expropriation bill, the impact and application being wholly understood by the US government, led by the President Donald Trump. Our diplomats, everyone's been at work. I mean, I know that we have some issues around whether we want to engage Washington or not at this stage. Are you supporting their narrative? And by
no, I'm not supporting their narrative. No, not at all. And their narrative is based on misinformation, that there's widespread land expropriation taking place in South Africa. And I've already been very clearly on the record that that is not taking place. But what that act does do is serves as a deterrent to a potential investor. Would you really come to South Africa and invest billions in a huge factory if at the stroke of a pen a government official can expropriate that without compensation? Surely we should leave that for a court, the backstop. And that's all we ask for, a process to be clarified where a court will be the ultimate arbiter whether nil compensation is applied. I don't think that's too much to ask for. It's in line with what the Constitution says, and I think we could have avoided now the court case, and we can avoid all of this negative sentiment that's going on around the expropriation. It could clarify, make explicit what is currently a cause of great confusion, and I think we could have set South Africa very firmly on the path.
I mean, look, John, and I got to let you go because I know you've got other people to talk to. There are buffers, is my understanding, in that it's not just a government sees a piece of land and will take it away, especially if there's a thriving business that contributes to the South African economy. So it seems like a parochial understanding.
No, it's not a parochial understanding. It's a very clear legal understanding. In other countries where you have expropriation, and most countries have expropriation acts, the court is the ultimate arbiter in this particular matter. In this case, government at the stroke of a pen could, and then your obligation sits on you to then go to court to try and get it overturned. All we're saying is, if a nil compensation is going to be applied, let that be a decision of the court, not of a government official. That will then give the assurance to any investor that their investment is safe and that they have the backstop of the courts to be able to do that. What we need to be doing is opening the runway for investment in South Africa, not doing things that are making it very difficult to attract people into the country and get the growth that we need. We can't afford another quarter of 0.6%. It's negative growth.
All right. Well, it's been another hard day at the office. Thanks.
Welcome back, South Africa. My name is Louis Olompiti. We are now with the federal leader of the Democratic Alliance, Mr. John Steenhuisen. John, thank you for joining us. What is your reaction to this budget that we just heard?
Well, obviously, I've said very clearly when I emerged and before we went in that we're not in a position to support the budget in its current form. We don't believe this budget speaks to the growth agenda in South Africa, and it doesn't make some of the bold decisions that we need to be able to move the country forward. And so it's very, very important that people understand that you cannot simply pass a 1% cumulative VAT increase onto the people of South Africa, massively ramping up the cost of living, massively increasing the price of transport and other foodstuffs, without at the same time putting on the table some very, very clear issues that you could grow the economy with and create jobs. The Democratic Alliance joined government to be part of the job creation and economic growth agenda. We do not believe that at this stage and in its current form, this budget speaks to that. We're very happy to continue the negotiations and work towards when the instruments have to be tabled. But in its current form, this budget only has 39% of the support in the House, and it's up to the Finance Minister now explain how he intends to get this budget over the line. I would have thought you come to the Parliament with a budget that is locked away with its own majority. This budget doesn't have that.
Now, John, for South Africans at home who are quite nervous about this particular budget and what they heard here today, what is your message to them?
Well, my message is that it's very simple to them. I'm saying to South Africans at home who entrusted us with their vote and who I promised when I went into the GNU that I would focus on economic growth and jobs, that we will not lend our vote, which we obtained through you, to any budget that doesn't have economic growth and jobs at the very heart of it. And that was the undertaking we made to you, and it's the undertaking we have stood by steadfastly over the last few days. We are happy to continue to negotiate towards finding a budget, but that better be a budget that speaks to economic growth and jobs, and not a budget that speaks to the old tired cycle of borrow, tax, spend, cut. Borrow, tax, spend, cut. We need economic growth. In the last quarter, we had 0.6% economic growth. That is not good enough. We need to be growing our economy so we can lift more people out of poverty. All that's going to do is make life a lot harder for many, many more South Africans going forward. And in the absence of economic growth, that becomes a toxic mix of greater misery, greater poverty, greater unemployment, and greater suffering for many South Africans. And I cannot, and we cannot, in good conscience, sign off on a budget that we do not believe fundamentally speaks to the growth and jobs agenda in South Africa. And we hope that in the coming weeks, there can be further negotiations and we can try and find the way. But whatever way you cut and dice it, we will not lend our vote to any budget that doesn't speak to growth and jobs.
Thank you very much, John, for joining us. South Africa, there you have it. We have heard from the leader of the Democratic Alliance. We stand by our word that we will not support VAT increases that would adversely affect South African families. We stand by it. We will ensure that we work for economic growth and jobs. My name is Luyolo Mpiti, signing out. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for watching. All across our beautiful country, people are joining forces to elect the new government that can rescue South Africa. Like and follow us on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Please share our videos with friends and family. Let's rescue South Africa.